Across Australia, the same scene plays out every single morning. A queue forms outside a small shop front before 8 a.m. Someone calls out a flat white. A barista pulls a shot in under 30 seconds, and a regular pays without even looking at the menu. There are now more than 27,000 cafes and coffee shops trading in this country. Part of a wider cafe, restaurant, and takeaway sector that turns over more than $65 billion a year. It looks like the easiest business in the world to fall in love with. Good coffee, a loyal crowd, and a till that never stops ringing. But underneath that queue is a business with wafer-thin margins, a regulatory checklist that touches everything from grease traps to allergen labels, and a cost structure that can turn a full room into a loss-making morning. So how does a cafe actually make money in Australia? Let's break down the economics. It's easy to see the appeal. Coffee is close to a national ritual here. The average cafe seats around 55 guests and gets through hundreds of transactions a week. And the sector as a whole is worth more than $15 billion a year, just in cafes and coffee shops alone, before you count the food side. For a lot of people, owning one feels less like starting a business and more like buying a seat at a party that's already going. You're not manufacturing demand. You're just trying to be the shop front people walk into out of habit. Now, the numbers. If you're after the leanest possible entry, a small cafe under 50 seats, simple fit-out, compact kitchen, lean staffing, will typically run you somewhere between $80,000 and $200,000 to open. Step up to a full-size cafe with a proper commercial kitchen and a full food menu. And premium builds push past $400,000 once you factor in equipment, ventilation, and a serious fit-out. Buy into an established coffee franchise instead. And you're looking at $300,000 to $600,000 once the franchise fee, royalties, and marketing levies are added on. For a realistic, all-in launch, lease bond, fit-out, equipment, stock, and a cash buffer to survive the first few months, most operators should be budgeting somewhere in the $200,000 to $800,000 range, well before they've paid themselves a single dollar. And here's the hidden cost that catches almost everyone: the kitchen retrofit. One Melbourne cafe group thought their health inspection was a formality, right up until council told them to spend another $15,000 on grease traps and sinks they hadn't budgeted for after they'd already locked in their opening date. Cafes rarely break even on day one, which means that budget has to stretch 3 to 6 months past opening, not stop at the front door. Then there's the paperwork, and this is where owning a cafe in Australia stops looking like owning a cafe anywhere else. Before you sell a single coffee, you have to notify your local council that you're operating a food business. That's the baseline registration every cafe needs, and it comes with an inspection of your layout, ventilation, and waste systems before you're cleared to trade. If the food you're serving is unpackaged and ready to eat, which covers basically every sandwich, salad, and hot breakfast a cafe makes, you're legally required to appoint a trained food safety supervisor, someone who's completed nationally recognized training and holds a certificate that stays valid for 5 years. The single most restrictive quirk here is that this isn't optional guidance. It's enforceable law under the Food Standards Code, and council can shut down service over it. On top of that sits the standard business tax load every Australian operator carries. You'll need an ABN, you must register for GST once turnover crosses $75,000. Company profits are taxed at 30%, and any staff you employ fall under the Hospitality Industry Award, with its own penalty rates for nights, weekends, and public holidays. If you're selling packaged goods off the counter, jars of house-made granola, bottled cold brew, you're also on the hook for allergen labeling rules that became mandatory in 2024. Layer all of that together, and the real strategic challenge of running a cafe isn't the coffee at all. It's threading fit-out compliance, food safety law, and wage obligations into a business that still has to feel effortless to the customer standing at the counter. So where does the actual money come from? The unit of revenue in a cafe is deceptively simple: cups sold and covers served. but the average spend per visit sits around just $7.50 a head. A mid-size, well-located cafe can realistically turn over somewhere between $600,000 and $1.2 million a year. Here's where the fantasy usually cracks. Gross margin on coffee and food looks fantastic, typically 65 to 70%. But net profit, what's actually left after rent, wages, and running costs, averages just 3 to 4% industry-wide. With plenty of independent operators sitting even thinner, in the 2 to 5% range. Run the numbers on $1 million in revenue at a 4% margin, and the owner takes home $40,000 a year. For a business that likely has them on site before sunrise, 7 days a week. What actually pushes that margin higher isn't a secret menu item. It's controlling labor so it stays under 30% of revenue. Keeping rent close to the 10% of sales benchmark, rather than paying premium foot traffic rent. And building an all-day menu that keeps the till moving through the dead zone between breakfast and lunch, since roughly 6 in 10 cafes report flat or falling customer numbers outside their peak hours. None of this comes without risk. Rent, wages, and ingredient costs, especially specialty coffee beans exposed to global price swings, have climbed sharply in the past few years, squeezing margins that were already thin to begin with. Staff turnover and burnout are a constant drain in an industry that runs on early starts and weekend shifts. And losing a trained barista often means losing consistency the moment a regular customer notices their coffee tastes different. Councils can and do impose costly last-minute compliance conditions during fit-out, the kind of 5-figure surprise that blows out a launch budget before opening day. The market itself has grown fast. Cafe numbers are up around 30% over the past 6 years, which means a lot of new openings are competing for the same foot traffic in inner-city strips, and oversaturation is a very real threat in popular suburbs. And consumers have started pushing back on price. $6 coffees have become a genuine flashpoint, meaning an owner's ability to pass rising costs onto the menu is no longer guaranteed. Add seasonal swings, a single bad council inspection, or one popular staff member walking out the door, and a cafe that looked profitable on paper can tip into the red within a quarter. So does the queue out the front actually mean anything? It genuinely does. Australians' appetite for cafes isn't fading, and a well-run venue with a loyal local crowd can be one of the most resilient small businesses in the country. But you're not trading a 9-to-5 for a laid-back life pulling espresso. You're trading long, early hours and compliance paperwork for a margin so thin that most of the profit lives in the details. 3% off rent, 5% off labor, one extra sitting filled during the slow hour after lunch. The operators who actually succeed aren't the ones with the best coffee on the block. They're the ones who treat every single cost line like it's the only thing standing between them and breaking even. Because in this business, it usually is. Because at the end of the day, that queue outside the shopfront isn't proof the business works. It's proof the customer showed up. What happens after that is entirely up to the